Thanks for sitting down with me today, Rylan. Before we get started with the interview, I'd like to introduce you to our audience. Rylan Arnold is the Vice President and General Manager of Open Practice Solutions, a fast-growing healthcare technology company whose mission is to develop web-based practice management and medical billing applications based on open standards. Rylan has over 25 years of experience with practice management and EHR technologies and just celebrated his 10th year anniversary with OPS 2 months ago. Rylan started in the industry with Versus, one of the pioneers of billing software, and was later a regional sales manager for the publicly traded healthcare IT company AllScripts Healthcare Solutions. He was with AllScripts for 10 years prior to joining OPS. Welcome, Rylan.
Thank you. Good to be here, Matt.
Great. So I'm just going to hop right into the questions. Rylan, as I'm sure you know, the healthcare IT industry has a massive learning curve associated with it. What are your recommendations for someone who's just now entering healthcare IT?
I guess welcome to healthcare IT, first and foremost, to someone that's new. I think probably the great place to be, probably worth stating, recession-proof, growing every year, whether that's good for us as a country or not is another conversation, but from an employment standpoint, and an amazing place to be for a career. And I think the advice I give to new people entering the business is to spend all the time needed to learn what it is your particular segment of the industry is all about, and whatever the customer is that you serve. And sometimes those are internal customers, they may be external customers outside of the actual healthcare delivery, or healthcare providers themselves. Whoever your customer is, I think the most important thing is to spend the time to learn what it means to be them. What is it they do day to day? What are their concerns, problems, the challenges they deal with? From our own standpoint at Open Practice Solutions, we mostly try to hire experienced people in the industry that bring that knowledge to the table. But we've certainly hired newer folks that are entering the industry. And once we get them up to speed on who it is we are, what we do from a general sense, our routine is to send them out to spend time actually with our customers. Because I think that's the most important thing you can understand if you're trying to serve your customer is to understand who they are and what their needs really are.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense. And something from our perspective here at Etactics, we've hired people before that don't even know what a copay is, and they're some of our best performing employees. So there is hope for people who have no experience at all in healthcare IT.
Agreed.
And you certainly had some time to adjust in the industry as you spent 10 years working at the publicly traded and multi-billion-dollar healthcare IT company AllScripts. And what was it like working for such a massive company? What were the positive aspects of your experience, and what were some of the pitfalls?
Interesting question. And for clarity, I probably bring a different perspective to that because as you dig into that 10 years, it technically wasn't just 10 years at AllScripts. I actually came to be at AllScripts through acquisition. So I was with a smaller company. We were then acquired by a medium-sized company and were subsequently then acquired by AllScripts. So I was able to kind of experience the small private sector, the medium private sector experience, and then the, as you say, very large publicly traded healthcare organization. So I got to really, over that 10-year period, experience all the various pluses and minuses of those different size organizations and what you're able to do. Most of my time was spent on the sales, marketing, the revenue producing size of the organization. So certainly as you grow and you become an AllScripts, one of the nice things is that you're no longer having to introduce who you are because everybody knows who AllScripts is. So brand recognition And all that comes with that is certainly a real nice thing to experience when you're working for a company of that size. You mentioned pitfalls. Certainly, you get into the public space and you start to deal a lot with the cycle of the quarterly reporting, and it seems like life centers around the next quarter end and trying to get business wrapped up and make decisions all around the fact that you're having to announce your revenues and your achievements or your misses. So it tends to put you in kind of a crazy quarterly cycle that can be distracting at times, I think, from the bigger picture.
Right. Yeah, and that can certainly be tedious. And there's always drawbacks when working with massive companies. I mean, regardless of the industry they serve, even outside of healthcare IT. But one thing that's interesting is that these large public traded companies have huge budgets toward research and development. So they'll offer products and services that have all the bells and whistles attached to them. But conversely, like their products are often offered at a premium price because everything's about dividends and appeasing to the shareholders. Their billion-dollar revenues come from huge pools of clients, which is great, but this usually leads to like a poor customer service experience or inauthentic relationships, which is something that you kind of hinted at there in your answer. So what are the benefits of working with smaller, privately owned healthcare IT companies? And with your current venture, Open Practice Solutions, what are your biggest goals when working with new clients?
Yeah, and you definitely covered it. There's certainly the resource pool of that large company. You mentioned the R&D, the spend. You go to a conference and you've got the multi-story massive booth, and that's always an impressive and fun experience, giving out the free lattes. But those conference experiences are kind of indicative of the entire experience, in that you walk into that 3-acre booth and try to find the person that knows the answer to a specific question, and you could spend the next hour going up and down the stairs trying to figure out who knows the piece of information you need to know. That was kind of my experience as well, moving from small to large. While you may have more resources in theory at your fingertips, trying to make decisions, trying to get things done can be extremely challenging, because it's really hard to figure out who's responsible for any given area. There's a lot of finger pointing and a lot of chasing around to get things done. And I think that is ultimately what made this venture at Open Practice Solutions very attractive. When I started here 10 years ago, it was a very small organization, and having gone from small, medium, and large, I was able to live in all of those worlds and self-reflect on the fact that what's really fun is being in that nimble, small company environment. Privately held is a bonus on top of that, because you're able to take the long view on what it is you want to deliver to your clients. You're not focused on the next quarter. You can focus on the next 5 years, which ultimately is going to be better not only for the company and employees, but certainly for the customers as well, because those quarterly decision routines generally don't have a real good long-term impact. So yeah, the nimble, close to the customer aspect of the small company, having the customer not have to go through 20 different layers of bureaucracy to try to get a good idea heard by somebody that could actually do something about it, I find really exciting about being where we're at today.
Right. And you brought up a good point there. I mean, I didn't even bring up the fact of the trade shows. I mean, trade shows are a huge part of those big companies. They're all about having the flashiest booth. Like, come to our booth, we've got free popcorn and all that stuff. But I mean, all of their stuff is really kind of nonsense at a certain extent. So that's a really interesting point that you just brought up.
The row of cheerleaders can be exciting at the conference, but at the end of the day, it's really not adding any value to the customer.
Right. And then, so when a doctor's office or medical practice determines that it's time to start looking for a new practice management system, that they have to work, they obviously have a lot of work ahead of them, right? So what factors do you recommend companies should keep in mind while on the quest to find the practice management system that fits perfect for them?
Yeah, yeah, great question. Probably one of my favorites because the industry is in a funny clinical focused place where I would venture to say the vast majority of decisions today are made based on the clinical software, the electronic medical records software for the practice. It's often physicians making the decisions, of course. They are the product of a practice of the healthcare industry in general. And very often it's a physician-led decision, and certainly nothing wrong with that. And the physician needs to get what they need in order to practice great medicine. But it's often at the neglect of what's most near and dear to my heart, which is practice management and billing. A lot of the vendors out there that offer software in the clinical space offer what we do, practice management and billing, but it's an afterthought. And I think a lot of practices make the mistake of not even looking at the billing side of the equation. If the physician's happy, they just take whatever comes with the system. And the vendors know that this is true. They know the way they can sell systems is by making the physicians happy. The physicians are focused on what happens in the exam room. The net effect over that reality over years and years is that our side of the business, the revenue side, the billing, the practice management, has been generally neglected, and the clinical side keeps evolving, and the practice management software has been in the industry relatively stagnant. So the first point certainly is actually evaluate the system. Your question of what is it you should evaluate? Number one is make sure you actually do an evaluation. Beyond that, I think it's key that you actually know what it is you're looking for. So to do an analysis of your organization, your practice, your billing service, whatever it happens to be, and just kind of take an audit of the things that are working well, the things that aren't working well, and have a clear understanding of both when you head into the search, because the tendency, of course, every vendor is trying to sell their wares. I mean, that's expected, but it becomes really tempting to just fall under the spell of the salesperson and allow them to sell you. And my strong recommendation is to don't be sold. Spend the time to become an evaluator, a purchaser, and look at the systems from the standpoint of your priority list. Again, every system, no matter how much you might not like it, how old it is, there's usually some aspect of it that's working very well for your organization. Sometimes people take those things for granted. They put in a new system and realize that they lost some of the functionality that they just assumed because this is the new shiny out of the box system. It must do the things that my 15-year-old system did. It has to, right? Because it's the new system. But because the focus isn't on billing and practice management, my experience after, and I always hate to say it, being in this business for more than 25 years, the quality of the systems that we compete with today, frankly, it's a lower level of competition than what I was seeing 15 years ago. So number one, 2 and 3, evaluate the PM and make the evaluation an evaluation and not a sales process.
Right. And it's an interesting point because, I mean, you just can't get lazy when you're evaluating a new practice management system. It's not, you can't go for and fall for the marketing. You have to go for what you know has always worked with your system and then see what else there is available for it, right? I mean, that just makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I think that was a great answer.
Every system out there, and I know I'm besmirching a little bit the medical records vendors that also include practice management and billing, but no matter how good the systems are or aren't, they all have something good about them. And if you let the process drive it, then you're going to spend all your time looking at some nifty widget or dashboard that is in fact really great, but maybe isn't really relevant to what you need within your practice.
Right. So it's all about just staying focused. And I think that's a great segue to this next question here. So let's say after they find their ideal practice management system after some evaluation, the next phase would then be to implement it. And that's an entirely different amount of work that they need to do. So when you're onboarding new clients at Open Practice Solutions, what steps do you take to ease that implementation process?
Yeah, no, that is a whole different process, and it's never an easy, and it's never fun. And I'll answer your question as to how we best address that, but it's still not fun or easy. People are creatures of habit, and when you come in and you try to change everybody's day, it can be a painful process, right? We deal with the change on a regular basis in technology, and the Who Moved My Cheese book is one that, I wish I could get everybody to read prior to implementing their new system. But I think over the years, we've moved into a process which I refer to, taking kind of a manufacturing term, of just-in-time, and it's just-in-time training. When you are implementing a system, there's a mountain of information to try to absorb. There are all kinds of processes that you have to incorporate and change within your organization, and you just can't do it all at once. And in the early years, I think we had gone down a path of trying to maybe overshare, to use the social media term. And we've moved instead to understanding when you're getting ready to go live with your new system, there's a certain amount of things you need to be very good at. In our world, you have to be able to register a patient, you have to be able to schedule an appointment, some basics. And while they're basics and fairly straightforward processes, in the old system, you were doing them without thinking. So you were able to register a patient, schedule an appointment, enter a charge while you were updating your Facebook page. You weren't even thinking about it because you've done it thousands of times. Well, now you put the new system in front, you can't do anything without thinking about it anymore. Every little thing requires some thought and some methodical process behind it. So we break up the implementation into easily digestible, bite-sized pieces where prior to go live, you learn the minimum amount of things that you need to know in order to successfully go live on the system. Don't overwhelm people. As they mature in their utilization of the system, we continue to provide the training. Day one, you might be collecting copays, but 2 weeks, 10 days later, you are getting your first insurance payments back on the new system. Well, that's a great time to start learning how to deal with insurance payments, not prior to go live. Because if you teach that prior to being live, by the time you need the knowledge, you've completely forgotten it. And now you're frustrated, and we're actually training you 2 and 3 times. So I think our approach of breaking the training up into small pieces as you need it has proved to be much more successful.
Right. And that's interesting, the just-in-time training. I mean, because you could have all the features in the world, kind of like what I mentioned before, but if their employees don't know how to take advantage of them, then obviously they're going to end up being in the same situation they were prior to switching vendors. So, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, because I, for one, I've gotten to the point where people will teach me something and I'll be like, oh yeah, let me write that down. And then I'll look at my notes and it'll be complete gibberish and I have no idea what we talked about. So I have to re-talk to them again. It's embarrassing. So that makes sense.
Indeed. Yeah, this being human thing can be tough. And to that point, it's a great point, because we've, I found what you said was very on point. When people implement new systems, they tend to stagnate at some point in time. They might have purchased it for some cool features, functions that were really exciting in the sales process, but then they fall into that rut of using the basics. And I mentioned that just in time, but the temptation is to never get to that next stage. And frankly, even if the staff does, we tend to be in a high turnover industry where the front desk and the schedulers and maybe the billing team that we trained initially, they aren't there 3, 4, 5 years later. So we've actually worked to incorporate the intelligence that you're describing, the gibberish notes, but hopefully a little less gibberishy. We actually have been working to build the knowledge into the system so that
Right.
when we see that you're coming to a function or a screen for the first time, we can kind of shout out to you on the screen, give you a tour of the function, and give you much like what I said with the implementation. It's just-in-time knowledge, because when
Right.
you look at the notes you took a year ago, they're not going to mean anything to you today. But if we can
Yeah.
present to you the information at the time you're trying to do a function, we find it's much more successful in getting newer customers or even older customers with newer employees to utilize some of the fancier functionality within the system.
Right. That's an awesome feature. So I'm going to transition here to kind of bring in EHRs a little bit. Now, in almost all cases, EHR and PM systems integrate with each other since the services complement one another. And recently, there's been a push for better user interfaces and experiences within the EHR space. I read an article the other day published by Computer World that said 50 to 70% of physicians are experiencing burnout symptoms due to EHR-related workloads. Have you noticed this call for better user experiences within practice management? And then what is Open Practice Solutions' process for evaluating new functionality or workflows within your applications?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that EHR issue definitely is getting a lot of press. And despite the push for adoption, I don't know what the number is these days. It seems like last I heard it was in the 70-80% adoption range within the clinical side. Now, our side of the healthcare practice, billing and practice management goes back 25, 30 years.
Right.
So that push for the user experience that you're describing started much earlier.
Yeah.
So we are routinely implementing practices that are on there or dealing with people, billers, practice managers, administrators that are implementing their fourth, their fifth, their sixth system. So they tend to be very experienced in this is what I like, this is what I don't like. But that universal push for better is certainly just as applicable in our world. And we just goes back to that focus on the client and the end user and being the small company. We have a policy and a drumbeat within Open Practice Solutions for getting to the customer and the why. Anytime we get a question in the support line, it's why. Why are they trying to do what it is they're asking for? And if we can understand what it is they're trying to accomplish, then we can continue to evolve the platform to better meet their needs. And I would say that sums it up. It's about listening to the customer and staying close to the customer, which we certainly are able to do probably more readily, not being a multi-billion-dollar organization.
Right. And yeah, I mean, a lot of times when a customer brings in an inquiry or something and needs some support help, there's a reason why, like you said. So I mean, that makes a lot of sense. It's always interesting. Like it might not be very obvious as the reason why, but if you really dig deep and meet and collaborate with your team members, you can certainly come up with that. So that's an interesting way to put it. I enjoyed that answer for sure.
Yeah, and not to prolong it too much, but I think it's very much what we deal with from customers and our support team deal with. I think it's analogous to what the physicians deal with. When the patient walks in the door, they've already self-diagnosed themselves. They've Googled it, they've been on WebMD, they know what it is they have.
Armchair doctors, yeah.
Exactly right. And we deal with the same thing. When the customer calls, they tend to tell us what it is they need as opposed to the problem that they're trying to solve. And that's what we continue to train our team on, is making sure to not just listen to the ask, but in addition to listening to the ask, to make sure before the end of the conversation you understand what it is the client's trying to accomplish. Because in some cases,
Yeah.
they're trying to do something in the wrong spot, and rather than add another checkbox somewhere else, we can actually point them in a different direction and give them a much better answer and experience.
Right. Right. So now one of the aspects that OPS actively promotes, and I found this on your guys' LinkedIn, was that your applications are developed on open standards. So hence the name Open Practice Solutions, right? Could you elaborate on what you mean by that? And then what makes Open Practice Solutions experience different than other practice management software?
Sure. Yeah. I think it ties together some of the earlier points in the conversation. The term open is not open source. That's one of the questions that we often get. Not an open source platform, but it's more of a philosophy than it is a technology, because the technology continues to evolve. But open really speaks to the fact that our focus is on providing our clients the absolute best billing and practice management workflow and functionality that is out there, knowing that there are clinical systems that are going to best meet the physician's needs that need to work hand in hand with OpenPM, our application. So rather than try to be everything to our clients, the open is the idea that we are looking to tie together all of the different technologies that the practice or billing service wants to employ, and making sure they work together seamlessly. Now that over the years ago, it was an HL7 interface type conversation. These days, it's more of an open API integration. So as that integration standard evolves and the technology for integration evolves, then we are highly in tune to that because of the open aspect and philosophy of what we do. So the FHIR API being the latest healthcare standard API, we have adopted that and are utilizing that to allow our customers to plug into OpenPM, the clinical software or lab software, whatever it is that they're utilizing within their organization.
Right. And I think, that also kind of plays to that answer you said earlier, where it has to do with customer feedback, always be willing to learn from customers and change the UI as necessary. So I think that really kind of also encompasses it as well. So.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So Rylan, I'm going to conclude here. So thanks for taking the time for today's interview. Before we leave, I like to always open up the floor to our guests. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about Open Practice Solutions before we close?
Sure. Yeah. I think the conversation has been around technology, the evolving of technology and the various aspects of that, which is certainly important. Being in the healthcare IT business for some years, I think our clients have come to expect across the industry generally substandard client service, customer service. You call, you want that answer. So I guess I would round it out to say that although we take great pride in the solution that we offer and we consider it to be the best thing out there, and we would stand it up next to anything, I think at the end of the day, in addition to buying software that it takes care of your needs, more importantly is the actual customer support and service after that implementation. And I think, sadly, that the healthcare industry has kind of just come to terms with bad support. And it's almost expected, and it become a punchline in many cases. So in our next interview, I'll tell you my favorite joke that relates to that. But I think really it's about the service after the sale. And frankly, I think a practice would be better off with a mediocre system and excellent support than having the opposite. Having amazing software, if you don't know how to use it and you can't get any answers to your questions, then it doesn't matter that in theory it's an amazing solution. So I would encourage anybody going down this path to not only do the evaluations that we discussed, but take the time, and it's a hassle, and everybody's short on time, but it's worth the investment to talk to the customers and truly talk to customers. Online reviews are great, but there are certainly well-known incentive programs out there that encourage positive reviews. And I think there's nothing like talking to users and to hear the pros and cons from them themselves and what happens when they pick up the phone and make that call.
Wow. All right. Well, that was a great wrap up, Rylan. I appreciate that. Thank you for your time today. I like I said, I appreciate it. So until next time.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Matt. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too.